Okay. Okay. So this is recording number 6 of Megillat Esther of our class. And I'd like to welcome everybody. And I'm glad to see your smiling faces and you're all in your places. I would like to talk about some of the things from last week that we brought up. I just want to get that off the table because I think it's important to clarify a few things. We all need to put on our viewing glasses of 2,000 years ago in order to understand many of the situations in the time of the Megillat Esther. I'm asking you to do that because after the questions of last week, I felt as if we were looking at the Megillah with 21st century lenses. And we can't really do that. We can't judge or comment on all of what happened back then, trying to understand it with our current persona in the times that we live in, when in actuality, the times were so very different. What I'm referring to is last week we discussed that the girls that the king required in his decree that would be brought before him in the selection of a new queen to replace Vashti were taken, the word lakach, kach. And it was the Hebrew word is to take. However, many of the Meforshim say that they were snatched and not taken. And of course, these Meforshim, these commentators, are actually looking at the situation through their lenses, whatever century they lived in. But the Hebrew word is not snatched, it's taken. And they were not taken probably by force. And in order to understand why they were not taken by force, I'm going to explain a little bit that if a family back then had any number of children, then they, of course, wanted to marry off the daughters as quickly as possible to someone who would take care of them. And so it wasn't as if it was such a tragedy that someone would want to have their daughter taken by the officials to the palace, because the families knew that once the king made a decision, if it was not their daughter, that those daughters would be taken care of for the rest of their lives. They would be kept as concubines. However, they would not be thrown back on the streets. Had they been thrown back on the streets, as non-maidens, non-virgins, and sent back to their homes, there was probably no way that those girls could be married off, and they'd become a terrible burden to their families. It's not like they went out and got a law degree from Harvard and opened up a law business or a store downtown somewhere. There was nothing for these girls to do. They would probably turn to prostitution or be maids or servants for somebody else. So the king was actually doing, by keeping them, he was doing the family and the girl, I guess we would call, a favor. If everyone could mute themselves, I would appreciate it. It's hard to talk above the noise. Some people speaking, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. So that was one thing that we discussed. We also discussed the words for servant Someone said they didn't like the word for that was used, that the servant of the king did whatever, made a recommendation. And throughout the text, we find that there's different terms used, Hebrew words used for servant. I don't know why you don't like the word servant. That is what they were. They were there to serve the king at the king's pleasure, whether it was someone in the inner circles of the king who made suggestions for these decrees, whether it was someone who served the king his dinner, it was someone who cleaned the palace or cleaned out the stables. They were all servants, and they probably were paid and given housing, etc. So I think we have to not be so sensitive to that word, because it is what it is in the text, and it is what it is back then. Now, the other thing, I wanted to make a correction from last week. I said that the selection of Queen Esther was in the 7th year, so it took 7 years to choose. No, my mistake was that after the party, the search, that was the 3rd year of King Ahasuerus's reign, and 4 years later, Esther was chosen. So it was a total of 7 years, but it wasn't 7 additional years after the party. Now it didn't really take 4 years to make the selection. It wasn't that many girls that it was 4 years worth of every night for the king. I'm sure the king had many things to take care of, and he was involved in lots of other things like affairs of state, running his enormous empire of 127 provinces. And there were intermittent wars with the Greeks during that time. So he wasn't spending his time in just selecting a queen. So I hope that clears up some of the questions that you had last week. And now we're going to move on to chapter 2, verse, if you have your text, verse 19. So I'd like, does everyone have that? Chapter 2, verse 19. Linda, do you have the text with you?
Yes, I do.
Could you read for us, please, until the end of the chapter?
Yes. Yes, I can. And when the virgins were gathered together the 2nd time, and Mordecai sat in the king's gate, Esther had not yet made known her kindred nor her people, as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther did the commandment of Mordecai, like as when she was brought up with him in those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate. 2 of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, of those that kept the door, were wroth and sought to lay hands on the king Ahasuerus. And the thing became known to Mordecai, who told it unto Esther the queen. And Esther told the king thereof in Mordecai's name. And when inquisition was made of the matter, and it was found to be so, hanged on a tree, and it was written before the king. Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
That's the rest of the chapter.
Yep, that's it. Thank you. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so let's take a step back from 15. Let's go back to 14, where we will start in the evening. It explains about the girls, and then it explains that they go to the guardian of, they go back to the concubines' chambers, And then Ahasuerus selects Esther. He falls in love with her for her grace and her beauty, and he puts the crown on her head. The king loved Esther more than all the women, and she becomes the new queen. So it says in 18, then the king made a banquet, a great banquet for all, and all his officers and his servants, and it was Esther's banquet. It was specifically for her, and he proclaimed, now it's interesting what happens. The king is so enamored with Esther, and he is hopeful that she will become, as we spoke about, this image of Mother Persia, that she will represent everyone just like he does, and that he will have a wonderful partner who is not so quick with her tongue as Vashti was. And he's all excited, and in showing that of his excitement, we see that he does two very generous things. He sends out gifts to those around him. These gifts are in the name of the queen. So he's very excited about providing lovely things to whoever is worthy of the king's esteem. And he has, as it is written in my text, amnesty for the provinces, which means that he did not charge taxes at that time, at that moment. So people were excited to have a new queen because they were free not to have to pay taxes at that time, at that moment. So two things were done. This is another example of the generosity of Ahasuerus to his empire. And so we continue then with a very interesting paragraph, and it talks about Mordecai, and we are told that, and when the maidens were gathered together for the second time. Well, this is very strange. Here we hear about Esther being crowned, and now we're hearing about more maidens are being brought in. I'm not quite sure exactly what the reasoning is that there were more women brought in, but I would like to tell you that last week some of you were very distraught that the girls brought to the king were of we said possibly 16 to 30. We thought that age group, a reproducing age. And after some very, very interesting research, I have this book now that I'm also using as a text. It's just called Esther by Rabbi Yoni Grossman, who lives in the Gush and is at Herzog College. He says that the girls were approximately 12 years old, and if they hadn't become of age to reproduce, then they were kept in the concubines area or the harem until they could reproduce or became of age, and consequently then they would be brought to the king. So this is the same thing that we read about with Esther and Mordecai. The text tells us that he adopts, and when they say adopts, it's like in quotes, adopts her as his daughter, but it could very well be that he was she was very young, and he could at some point marry her. And that's where the midrashim come, that no, Esther wasn't really his cousin or his daughter. She became his wife. That's because a man could take a young girl under his wing and raise her. And then when she became 12, 13, 14, whatever age that she could start to reproduce, she became of marriageable age and was taken by the man who was raising her and to be his wife, to have children. So that's where we learn the midrashic text that that Mordecai and Esther might have been married. But if the decree said maidens, young virgins, then they were not going to take anybody who was married. And if a girl had heard about the decree and did not want to be taken to the palace, all she had to do is get married and lose her virginity, and she would no longer be accessible or desirable to be brought to the king. So there was a loophole there, a way out, and Esther could have done the same thing had Mordecai married her, or had Mordecai seen to it that she quickly became married to a Jewish guy, if that was the case. So our take on the girls being forced into this is not necessarily so. So we continue that a second wave of girls are brought in for whatever reason. There are loads of midrash that are attributed to this second wave of girls. I will only mention the midrash one quickly. To me, it's senseless, but okay, I do want you to know there's a midrash that the king was so concerned about where Esther was from, because she's not revealing her identity, that he consulted Mordecai, who was an advisor now, and Mordecai said, well, if you make her jealous with more girls coming in, maybe she'll reveal herself, when he knew that in fact that would not be the case. So that was midrash. It's a story. It is not in the text. We have no knowledge about why more girls were brought in, but clearly they were, because it says in the text. And we continue on to the next paragraph, understanding that in that paragraph, Mordecai is mentioned again. And so we see that even after Esther becomes queen, she is very close to Mordecai on some level, and maintains her relationship. And this is an important thing for us to remember, because in a few minutes, I'm going to tell you why. Okay, so now the next paragraph is about what happens. There's a plot to assassinate the king by two of the king's chamberlains. They're guards of the threshold. Maybe they were at the door or at the gate. And Bigtan and Teresh hatch a plot that that Mordecai somehow, by sitting at the gate, gets wind of. He then in turn tells Esther, and Esther in turn tells the king in his name. So we ask ourselves, why do we have this very, very short paragraph, a quick glimpse that there is palace intrigue going on, that there are people who like in all generations, when there are kings and rulers, often want to depose them or dispose of them. And so these two are caught and they're hung, and the plot was made known by to Mordecai. So the chapter 2 ends when the matter is told to the king, and it is written in the king's chronicles, the daily chronicles. So what do we learn essentially from this very, very short paragraph? Yeah, anyone want to take a stab at what we learned from that?
If you keep your ears to the ground, you might get some interesting gossip.
Okay, thank you, Mira. Okay, anyone else?
Actually, that Mordecai essentially saved the king's life by overhearing this.
Okay.
So that would, put him in good stead. By the way, in my text, it says that the two guys were impaled on stakes. Does anybody else's text say that? I was just curious.
No.
No?
Mine says hanged.
Okay.
Mine says gallows. Also, it shows that the king, I guess, relied on information that Esther was giving him.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right. And certainly he believed her. Okay. Anyone else?
Me, Lori.
Okay, Lori.
I see this is setting up the scene for the next things that are going to happen. The fact that even when it was told to the king, it was just put in the chronicles and there was no reward. One would think once you heard, and that, that validified the action of these two people. That also tells us there was a lot of intrigue going on, always in the court. We know that. But I think this was just setting it up, for what happened afterwards.
Okay.
What I don't understand is, wasn't Mordecai, even though he was his advisor, wasn't it known that he was a Jew, and wasn't it known that Esther was his charge?
Not necessarily.
Okay. All right.
Was Mordecai considered a servant?
He was considered, I believe at the time, in the employ of the king, but I don't think he was one of the servants. We get different names of what he does later on. Okay. Well,
Rhonda?
yes.
Rhonda, can I ask a question? Maybe I'm missing something, but how do we know that Mordecai was in the king's, like a servant or whatever he was? Do we know that? Already I'm missing something.
Because, well, we're not sure at this point what his connection is, but
Right.
the fact that he's sitting at the gate, the city gate, is some type of, the judges used to sit at the city gate and mete out judgment. That's where the courts would be held. That's where people coming and going for commerce. It was a very important place to sit at the gate. It's not like he was squatting there, eating, begging for bread with a can of pencils. It was a very prestigious place to be, and he spoke many languages. We are told that he spoke many languages, and so consequently, he got wind of this. It wasn't just told to him. He probably overheard some things happening at the gate. Now, whether did someone else have something to say?
Was everybody allowed to be in the gate, or were there special people?
I don't think everyone could just sit around the gate. That's why it was an important position.
I mean, do we know that Mordecai
We don't
was the
even
head
know
of
why
the
he got
Jewish?
it.
What?
Do we know that Mordecai was the head of the Jewish community and that's why it was there?
No, we don't. No, we don't.
Right,
Nowhere does it say that. in
And
the text.
also,
right.
hello,
Yeah,
hello. And also we don't even know why.
okay, you're frozen. Okay, Linda.
Well,
Sitting by the
also
gate,
when
and
Esther
also
told
when he's sitting
Mordecai,
by- that he never went into the palace.
Right,
when Esther told Achashverosh about the plot, she made a point of saying that Mordecai is the one
right,
who gave her the information.
Right.
Adele.
right. Adele, did you have something?
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question, something that's always bothered me, and I don't know if there's an answer to it. But here, and someone just mentioned this, Esther told the king and informed the king in Mordecai's name. How was she able to do it so easily when later on, when Mordecai says, go to the king and talk to him, I can't go to him. It's too difficult to just walk into the king.
Exactly.
That's an
So,
interesting point.
so
Good
that,
point,
great
Adele,
question.
good point.
so that's
Thank
that's a problem in the text here, because if she is so frightened, then how in the world could she have just told him, unless she told a servant to tell the king? So we don't know, and that's a very good question. That's one of the very big unanswered questions, among others. Okay, so whether this was insurrection from inside the ranks of the palace, or it was just a random plot of unhappy citizens based on what was going on historically in Persia. Like I said, there were other things the king might have been taking care of, like the security of the empire, wars that were being fought. It could have been disgruntled citizens with how some things had been handled in his relationship with the geopolitical situation at the time. So we don't really know what was happening, but there was a plot to kill him, and now he knows that his life is in danger. Perhaps it hadn't been before, and this sets up for the next chapter what's to happen. The king's life is in danger. What would you think the king would want to do? Okay, this is a very interesting question. Now, let's start and read the next chapter. Start with chapter 3 and read a few of the paragraphs. Dorothy, would you read for us, please?
After these things happened, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and gave him a high rank. He made him more important than all the other royal officers. All the king's servants at the royal gate would have to get on their knees and bow before Haman, for this is what the king had ordered everyone to do for him. But Mordecai would not get on his knees and would not bow. So the king's servants at the king's gate asked Mordecai, why do you disobey the king's order? When they said this to Mordecai day after day, and he did not listen to them, they told Haman about him to see if Mordecai would succeed, for he had told them he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not bend his knee or bow before him, Haman was filled with anger. However, he thought it would be a shame to punish only Mordecai because they had told him that Mordecai was Jewish. So Haman wanted to destroy Mordecai's people, all the Jews in the entire kingdom of Ahasuerus.
Okay, let's stop there. Wow, we get a lot of stuff there. First of all, In Megillat Esther, there are more things that we don't know about than there are that we do know about. So as we leave chapter 2, where Mordecai has been the hero of that moment, 15 minutes of fame by telling Esther about the plot to kill the king, you would think that the king in response would want to immediately reward the person who saved his life. And yet in the next chapter, we hear that after these things, meaning after the situation of Bigtan and Teresh, these things, the king promotes Haman right after this. Now, first of all, he didn't just find Haman off the streets. Haman, it was somehow, must have been in the palace in some position. We said that he might have been Memuchan. We don't know for sure, but Haman had to have been around in order to be chosen immediately after following this plot to become what seems to be like the guardian of the king, and he was like a spy. He's going to go around the palace. He's going to make sure that nothing is, no one is plotting more plots, more things going on, insurrections, etc. So Haman is immediately raised to second in command. What's the question that comes to mind right then? Is there something that?
What did he do to deserve that?
Okay, that's a good question. That wasn't the one I had in mind, but it's a good one.
Okay, all right.
What did he do to deserve that? That's number one.
I
And
think he stepped in just like he did when they needed a queen, and he was the one that starts telling how to go about it and what should be done next.
well,
That seems to be his nature.
well, that was Memuchan, and that may have been Haman.
Yeah.
But the question that strikes me is, why doesn't the king make Mordecai second in command? Here's the guy who saved your life. Let's make him the guy who continues to save your life.
It could be that the king didn't know that it was Mordecai and who saved his
He
life.
did. It
it's
tells
written
us.
down.
Oh,
It's
Yes, and
written
Esther
down in the
told him.
Chronicles, but maybe he didn't care enough to find out who it was. And maybe that answers probably Adele's question, that Esther didn't go directly to him, because then he might ask questions. Well, what connection do you have with Mordecai, right?
Exactly. Okay,
So she
so
might circumvent it and tell it to someone else who told it maybe to the king. And so the king really didn't have a direct understanding that it was Mordecai until he read who it was that saved him.
that's a big possibility, that Esther told a servant goes into the king, and the king says, okay, okay, great, just put it in the book of Chronicles, that's fine. And he doesn't even think about it. And so, but and that's another thing you brought up, is had Esther told him directly, the king directly, you would think she would have been afraid her connection with Mordecai would have blown her cover of not being a Jew, and to keep her heritage unknown to the king. So it seems very likely that the information, because it went from person to person, got a little watered down and less intense and important when it finally reached the king. But you would think, when you read about this situation, that after these things, and it was immediately following this, that Haman becomes second in command. Now we know that Usually in text, Jewish text, we only get a name with the name of a father, like a name Ben somebody. And here we have not only that it's Haman, the son of Hammedatha, but also we have that he's the Agagite. He's identified as who? A relative
Coming
of
from Agag.
who?
Agag.
Agag. Okay. Agag is Amalek.
Amalek, yeah.
Okay. So right now we have the introduction of all the main characters that we need. Haman has now been introduced as number 2 guy, and with number 2 guy position comes power. It comes the signet ring of the king, which means that he can send out decrees. And in addition to that, he gets all rights and privileges of the king, which means that it's mandated for everyone to bow down before Haman, just like the king. Now, I want you to know that there is no reason why Mordecai could not bow down to Haman, unless, like the Midrashic sources tell us, that Haman had this big symbol on his, like a breastplate of some sort, which was like an idol of some sort. But the Jews throughout history bowed down before kings and emperors out of respect, because they were the rulers of the state or empire that they lived in. In fact, in order for me to clarify some of this in my head, I actually went online and watched Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks's induction into the House of Lords, and he doesn't prostrate himself, but he does bow. So I thought that was very interesting. Of course, there are bows, and then there are falling on your face bows. But there's no place that it says you can't acknowledge out of respect a head of state. And so it says we can't bow before idols, but it doesn't say we can't bow out of respect. So consequently, we ask ourselves, why is Mordecai not bowing? What's his thing here? Is he angry that Haman got the job and he didn't? Is there now a rivalry between these two guys? We don't know. But that's a good question, because as we read the text, we saw that people asked Mordecai, over and over, why aren't you bowing? Why aren't you showing respect to this guy? And Mordecai says, no, I'm not doing it. No. Why was he so stubborn about this if there was no reason to not bow before this second in command? So that's a question that is very important.
Could I
Yeah.
insert something? Maybe that Ahasuerus definitely knew that at this point that he was a Jew, that Mordecai is a Jew. And maybe that in his upbringing and his whole background culture that is instilled in him from generations, there is suspicion of the fact that Mordecai is a Jew, and they never can quite shake this feeling that the Jew's going to come in there somewhere and disturb their whole rule. So maybe it was because in his mind, he was still Mordecai the Jew.
Okay. Yeah.
Uh,
Okay, go ahead. Lori?
Okay, going back to the the other sentence about Mordecai getting the reward and so on, I think that we should know, especially from this passage, that leaders have a short attention span when somebody helps them tremendously. They say, oh, that's great. And then they lose sight of the fact of what was. Okay, I agree with Beverly that I think that it was known that he was a Jew, okay, because he probably prayed and all that other stuff. But at any rate, these leaders have short attention spans when it comes to giving homage and giving honor to people that really help their country, okay? Very short attention span. And as far as the giving Haman the high position, well, he was always talking to him. He was in his presence all the time. So I imagine he inflated the stuff he did. And the king liked, to me, the king was a vain and sort of foolish man. So that's what he was. And that's why he did it and had a short attention span to look and see who really does benefit him and his kingdom.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. All right. So, but a lot of the stuff you're drawing on, Lori, careful, is midrash. Okay. So it's not text. So you have to be careful when you're making certain assumptions that you're basing it on text. Like I said, we are told through many Meforshim that probably Memuchan was also Haman, but we don't know for sure. So that's where we have to be careful that he was all, but clearly he's in the palace doing something of significance, that the king knows who he is. Because
Avis, I think you wanted to say something, but you're muted.
Right, maybe Mordecai knows that Haman is a descendant of Amalek, and as a traditional enemy of the Jews, he will not bow down to him because he's Amalek.
Maybe. If the writer of the text here knows that of Haman's descent, who is he descended from, maybe they did know, because introductions were always made, your name, who you're the son of, and very possibly your lineage was discussed. So it could be, that's a possibility. All right, anyone else have something to say? So the king has this new position for Haman to prevent further threats. And Haman's job is to detect or spy out others who are probably plotting against the king. And he has special rights that he's given. And he's placed within the palace. He has a job within the palace. So that's an interesting thing that we should keep in mind, that Haman, being second to the king, has access to the king and can be in the palace anytime, at any time. And we hear of this later on, which sounds a little curious, but now that we know why he can have access to the king, it's very important for us to keep in mind. Now, Esther knows that that now he's in the palace. Perhaps she now has to be a little more cautious of who she is, and so consequently we have to wonder a little bit about Esther, about Mordecai, and about Haman. There are questions that we need to ask ourselves about these three people. One of the questions, now that Haman has been promoted to second in command, is where did this hatred for the Jews come all of a sudden? Now, maybe it wasn't, as some of you have mentioned, all of a sudden, but it would he have sought out other Jews and made this decree of killing all the Jews if there wasn't a Mordecai who was agitating him? And then there's a question that begs to be asked: were Esther and Mordecai religious Jews, or who happened to have stayed behind when the exiles were allowed to go back home after the 70 years by Koresh, Koresh, which is Cyrus the Great, in his proclamation that all the Jews can return to Eretz Yisrael? Why didn't they go back if they were religious Jews who cared about Eretz Yisrael? Or did Mordecai feel that he had a mission, something to do in Persia, and so he stayed behind? You know that in almost every royal palace throughout history, there's always one or more Jews that get chosen to be an advisor, Barbanel, Daniel, now we learn about Mordecai. So there's always a Jew that gets chosen who comes into the palace. So we have to ask ourselves, what kind of Jews are Esther and Mordecai? Are they on the verge of assimilation, but still get labeled Jew? And does that have any significance with why Esther keeps it a secret and doesn't tell the king that she is from the Jewish nation? These are two questions. Why does Mordecai and Esther not go back? Why? What kind of Jews were they to begin with? Or did Hashem have some plan where he was going to pluck these two out of Jewish, the community there, to rise up in the occasion of taking charge of a bad situation and becoming the saviors of the Jewish people? We have to ask ourselves these questions because they're very, very interesting. I find them interesting. And the other question is, why does Mordecai not bow, and why does Esther not reveal her identity? So these are biggies that we do not really get answered throughout the text.
Rhonda, I was always under the impression that it wasn't until after Mordecai and Esther had saved the Jews that the Jews that were exiled were allowed to go back. It happened before?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh,
yes,
right.
It did. Yes, it did.
Okay.
That Cyrus, in his decree,
Right.
sent the Jews back. Now, what happened was the rebuilding of the temple was stopped. We learned about this earlier on. The rebuilding of the temple, once Ahasuerus takes over, was stopped because of letters that were sent from Israel in the name of Haman's sons and other political people. Remember, they said if you let the Jews rebuild the temple, they'll stop paying taxes to you, and they won't stay part of the kingdom, the empire.
Yeah, that all goes back to their underlying fear of the Jew.
Right, exactly. Or the underlying fear of not getting taxes from them.
Well, yeah.
But
Haman,
yes.
was Haman the
Rhonda?
one who convinced the king to stop the rebuilding of the Beit
Yes,
HaMikdash?
yes, we learned that the letter was signed by Haman's son. Yeah, go back in your notes.
Rhonda, do you think
Yeah,
Do you think that Mordechai had Ruach HaKodesh?
well, I don't, Mordecai?
Yeah,
There's no place in any text that seems to say that.
okay.
He's not a prophet. He's not a Navi. Yeah, he may have had some intuitions about certain things, but no. Anybody?
Rhonda?
Yes.
Okay.
Rhonda, he probably felt like most Jews through every generation. They're good citizens wherever they are. There's no reason for them to leave. And either he felt that he'd have a place. I don't know. But I do think why should he be forced out? You know, why he might have just been a very practical man.
You
He
mean
had built a
Mordecai?
life there, just like all generations.
Right. Well, that's what I'm asking you. Does he stay behind because he's just a part of the assimilated Jewish population who
I
wanted
would
to,
think so.
you know,
I
who
would think
wanted to
so.
stay there? And, you know, why bother going back to Eretz Yisrael? I'm perfectly happy here.
Right, I would think so, until danger lurks. And once he realized danger lurked, and he said to Esther, don't think you're going to be, saved, because of your position. I think all of us come to that conclusion in every generation, unfortunately.
Right, right. Okay.
You also mentioned here that, where is it? I had it a minute ago. Why did the hatred for the Jews come from all of a sudden? But yet when we talk about Haman being from Agag and Amalek, it really didn't come all of a sudden. It's always been there. It's inbred in them.
Right. Okay. So when I mean all of a sudden, I meant all of a sudden in the story.
Right.
But you're right. Of course. Absolutely. Absolutely. We learned that throughout all of history. Okay.
I would have thought that Haman had a bit of power behind him, maybe not a lot at that early stage, but he was a somebody, and maybe, he stayed back, not because so much that he was assimilated or even integrated, but because he felt a responsibility to the community that was left behind. Because often people of stature are the last ones to go,
Right.
because they feel a responsibility for the community that's left behind.
Right. That's often the case. Many times we hear about leaders in the community say, everyone go and I'll be the last one to turn the light off.
Right.
So, okay. That's why I'm throwing it out to see what you have to say, and we'll get some more answers as we go on in the text. Anyone else? So here we have in chapter 3, we have the four main characters. We have the king, we have Esther, we have Mordecai, and we have Haman. And so we are now introduced to all the main characters of the story. Now we have come to the main plot of the story, and that is this horrible hatred that starts to eat up Haman, so much so that he says to himself, I'm not going to waste my time on just killing one guy, one Jew. I'm going to kill them all. And so he starts to hatch his own plot. Now, ironically, he's the one who's supposed to be watching out for any kinds of difficulties within the kingdom against the king, and now he's plotting his own situation of treachery here. Now, it tells us that he's filled with rage, that he can't stand it, that Mordecai has become like an itch that that he can't reach, and it's agitating him to no end. And so he needs to take strong measures in which to deal with it. And so he's going to come up with a plan to destroy all the Jews, all the people of Mordecai throughout the kingdom. And now we learn, and let's go to, do we have time? It's all right. We're just,
Rhonda, wouldn't that be a big, I never thought about this before, a big financial loss for the king?
yes, it would be. Why do you think Haman says, I'll give you, when he says to the king, and we're going to find this out, I'll give you, I forgot how many talents of silver.
Right.
That amount is said to be how much the Jews were going to pay that year to the king. That's just an aside, you know, it's not fact, but that's that amount just didn't come out of the, you know, the air. There was a reason for that particular amount.
But that was just for the 1 year. What about the following years?
Well, okay, you're right. You're right. It's a lot of money, a lot of taxes, but perhaps we're going to see that the king is kind of like, all right, you know, Jews, I'm not sure. Okay, fine, do whatever you want. He's not really into this. It's not eating him up like it is Haman. And so he trusts his number 2 guy in a decision that he's going to make.
Rhonda,
Yes.
I had heard that the amount that he came up with, that he was going to give King Achashverosh to make up for the taxes that were going to be lost. Where is this coming from? It's coming from the Jews themselves. After he killed them all, he would take all their money. So they would be the ones paying those taxes once again.
Yes, that is definitely from the sources that what he was going to do, it was going to plunder, and because it says in the decree that the Persians can plunder. And so he was going to take everything from the Jews, and he would even have more left over for himself. So yes, you're correct. Thank you. All right, so we continue. Okay, let's, Adele, you want to read Pasuk 7, and you can read to the end of that Pasuk.
Pasuk 7,
Chapter 3.
In the first month?
Yes.
Okay, in the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Achashverosh, Pur, that is the lot, was cast in the presence of Haman from day to day and from month to month to the 12th month, which is the month of Adar.
Okay. No, that's it. That's it. Okay. So here we get the word Pur, meaning lot. You know, it's like a lottery, like lotto or Powerball or whatever you want to call it. This is seems to be how many astrologers, magicians, people who were advisors determined when and where to do something that was of great significance. Now, what this is, I think many of us thought that Haman took the dice, threw it, and it gave him a date, and that was it. But no, the text says he goes to throw to those who are throwing the dice, probably the magicians or the astrologers or whatever, and they cast these cubes. Now these cubes, you can Google what they look like. They had all kinds of astrological symbols on them. zodiac symbols and astrological and all kinds of things on them, on these cubes. And when they were thrown, they would give you maybe a day, a time of season, a time like morning, night, whatever. It gave you a lot of information. And the first time that, the reason it says here, they were thrown from day to day, then month to month. Well, the first time they were thrown, the Mefarshim say it was in Nisan, that month, the 12th, in the 12th month, that the date to kill the Jews was in Nisan. And Haman, clearly knowing who the Jews are, knew about the Jews having a holiday called Pesach, and Pesach happens in Nisan. Nisan is the time when God redeemed the Jews, saved the Jews through plagues and great miracles. So the first time that it says the poor, the lot say, next month is the time you should kill the Jews, Haman says, no, I'm not going to do it that time because that's not an auspicious time for me, not for the Jews, for me, because I could be destroyed by God. He didn't care whether the Jews were going to be destroyed. He cared about whether he was going to be successful or not. So it says he goes back basically day after day after day, month after month, until he feels as though he's got a good roll of the dice. And lucky Adar came up, which was at the end of the year. So now this also could be seen as the hand of God, that instead of being killed within the month, that the Jews are given 12 months. Clearly, he starts throwing the dice in Adar in the 12th month. And so God gives the Jews a year in which something can happen. And it's this 1 year after the 12th year of King Ahasuerus. So we know now, if it's in the 12th year that this plot is hatched, then it's 5 years later, after I think it's 5 years later that Esther was, since Esther's queen. Okay, so I think we're going to stop here. I think this is a good place to stop. And